everyone. Welcome to another Telgorithm webinar. My name is Samantha Carrera. I am a Senior Marketing Manager here at Telgorithm, and I'm here to guide this conversation as a moderator. We're here to talk all things 10DLC compliance with a very special guest today. We are joined firstly, of course, by our CEO and co-founder of Telgorithm, Aaron Alter, as well as Trevor MacDonald, who is a Senior Director of 10DLC Messaging at Syniverse, the nation's largest DCA. So this is a huge first for us. I think it may be a first in some other respects, but we're really excited to have this conversation. Some of the things that we're going to be looking at as a group today include the 10DLC ecosystem at a bird's eye view. We're going to demonstrate what a company or where a company like Telgorithm sits versus a company like Syniverse and how everything comes together. We're going to be asking Trevor for some compliance tips and resources for software providers like yourselves. We're going to ask Trevor, what can we expect from a 10DLC compliance standpoint in the year of 2024? There was a lot of change in 23, so we're curious to see what's ahead. And then finally, we are going to address some of the questions that we received in your form. So thank you for taking the time to submit those. And yeah, without further ado, I would love to bring our host and our guest speaker to the stage, Aaron and Trevor. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks so much, Samantha, for putting these all together. This is while it's a first for Syniverse, and we'll get to that in a second, but we've done many of these throughout the years, and we appreciate the attendance and the feedback we've gotten from the industry in general, not only from our many customers, but the industry in general, and we'll continue to strive and work very hard to make sure to continue doing so. But I know there's a lot of work that's involved in getting these things done and together. I really want to thank you for that. That said, just to intro myself here, I'm Aaron Alter, CEO and co-founder here at Telgorithm. We're a cloud communication texting or business texting API that specializes particularly in A2P 10DLC. A lot of acronyms. I know we'll get into some of that. And I am super excited by the guest we have today. I'll just say prior to Trevor's full intro to allow him to introduce himself, we're going to discuss what a DCA is, and I've discussed it in the past. But kind of peeling back the layers on what goes on within the telecommunications scene is a lot of what Telgorithm is after in regards to providing more transparency to the industry and the customers at large. And getting a DCA, again, we'll hear from Trevor in a second, is really maybe possibly the first of its kind that's happened here for various different reasons. And we're really proud to be one of the first to bring a DCA such as Syniverse to be able to host them here and explain why that's important and where they stand in the ecosystem to be able to help the broader industry understand 10DLC and make sure that they are continuing to be successful as 10DLC continues to evolve. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Trevor MacDonald over at Syniverse. Trevor, please say hello.
Yeah. Hey, Aaron. Hey, Samantha. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here today. My biggest goal at Syniverse is to help the industry understand 10DLC and just how simple it really is. I think if we simplify 10DLC and demystify some of the nuances around it, it will make it that much better for all of us, from the brands that want to reach the consumers all the way down to the actual consumers getting the message. So happy to be here and help with that mission.
Awesome. And it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you both. Yeah, we're very excited. So we can just dive right in at the very top layer, like, what is a DCA?
Yes. So, Trevor, for the audience that's listening, so many different acronyms and different names they hear within this ecosystem. If you can explain at, a very rudimentary level, if you will, what exactly a DCA is, or Direct Connect Aggregator is, what you guys do, where you stand in the ecosystem, and why it may matter to 10DLC, we could start there.
Yeah, thanks. So a DCA is that last stop. So the carriers basically have put DCAs in front of them to receive the messages and then send the messages into the carrier down to their consumer, and then actually receive all the messages back. So as you can imagine, there are hundreds of different entities that want to send messages into carrier networks, and then DCAs were put in place to basically be that last line, that select few that have the connectivity into the carriers and make sure that the traffic that's being sent is compliant within the carrier code of conduct guidelines and is not fraudulent, I would say. So there are certain requirements put on DCAs to make sure that the traffic being sent is viable and is what the customer wants. And then we work with CNPs like Telgorithm to make sure that the traffic from your brand gets there successfully down to the consumer, and that any traffic back is delivered to you all quickly and efficiently.
Awesome, awesome. I don't know if we could slide over to the next slide here, because I want a little double click into that a little bit further if we can here. So this is a diagram of the ecosystem that applies in 10 DLC, where brands sit, their campaigns, where Telgorithm sits, aka, like you just mentioned, your CNP, and then you have Syniverse on the left side over there on the bottom. If you could speak, a couple of questions here is, and I don't know if you can answer this or how you can, how do I really know if the provider I am using is a DCA or they're just a connectivity partner like Telgorithm? I guess I would like to know if that's the way that a regular CSP, if you will, or an ISV can tell that.
So the way a CSP would know is in TCR, when you register a campaign, you will actually select your DCA partner. So when you go in there and select the DCA, you'll have the list. And for Telgorithm, you will select Syniverse. That's how you know we're your DCA partner, because it's actually right there in when you register.
Awesome, awesome. And again, it's important to understand it's not necessarily because, and it's going to be my next question, because I may need to go to a DC or may not, depending on where I stand in the ecosystem, which leads me to my next question. What type of a company or a software provider should be going directly to a DCA like Syniverse versus, let's just say, a provider like a Telgorithm? If I'm a software provider and I have a platform that my customers who are businesses, aka brands, use to send and receive text messages to their customers, should I be going directly to a Syniverse or a DCA, or should I be partnering with a connectivity partner? And how would I know kind of which path to take?
Yeah, so in the industry, there are DCAs who actually serve as connectivity partners as well. Syniverse has made the choice to not do that. We are strictly a DCA. It helps us to stay neutral when it comes to vetting campaigns and compliance. So we actually prefer software providers to work with CSP like a Telgorithm or others, and then select Syniverse as the DCA. But there are those out there who do serve the function as both a CSP and a DCA as well. And TCR in the registration process makes that very clear. So it's really down when you look at it as a software provider or as a brand, it's, looking at the CSP or the CNP, what kind of services they can offer you. That's how I would recommend you make your best selection, Telgorithm or others.
Awesome. And just to, again, double click even further on that. So is it safe to say that it's an apples to apples or not apples to apples comparison going from, let's just say, a provider like a Telgorithm over to a Syniverse as an example? Because, folks here may be aware, like, for instance, you're seeing on the top left of this diagram, there's a company called Net Number there, and you might require yourself to get an NNID, and there's certain other features and functionalities, or infrastructural features and functionalities, I should say, that would potentially be needed to be built that are quite complex versus going to a Telgorithm directly where you don't need that versus going to a DCA directly. So is it safe to say that, again, depending on where I stand in the ecosystem, I may need to build that infrastructure, but at the same time, it's not necessarily from a technical perspective, migrating from a Telgorithm directly to a Syniverse, for example, would not necessarily be an apples to apples. Take the plug out of one outlet and just put it in the other. There might be other things involved related to that.
Yes. So when you look at, so there are no brands that can go directly to a DCA. The brand will always have to go to a CSP. As I mentioned, there are DCAs who serve as a CSP, but that's still separate from their DCA part. So when to your question, if I'm a brand and I need an NNID for Net Number, you're still going to deal with that at the CSP level. They'll either set you up your own NNID, which very few actually need, or you would use your CSP's NNID, and then they would help facilitate getting the long codes that you would need for your campaigns, utilize their NNID, and then those would all get provisioned into NetNumber either via your direct connect to NNID or through, a DCA such as Syniverse if that the functionality, if that functionality's been developed.
Awesome. And then just again, one more on this one, promise that we'll move
Sure.
on.
I love this
because these are
diagram, by
points-
the way. It's very straightforward.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to convey here. A lot of times, as mentioned, is you don't even know what you're dealing with. You just hear all these acronyms. I just want my messages to work. I mean, in an ideal world, I'm a brand. I just have a partner and it should just all work, but many times it doesn't. And then sometimes it kind of helps to understand what's going on behind the scenes. We're going to get to a lot of compliance things in a second. You might question, why do I need this, or who's interested in that? And I think this matters. The context of that is really helpful there. Just one last question on this one. So you mentioned a brand would definitely not be going typically directly to a Syniverse. How about a CSP? So like my point is that if you're a CSP and you're using a company like Telgorithm, and you decide that there's some other factors, and you want to go directly to a DCA versus a competitive provider to Telgorithm, my point is it's safe to say it's not an apples to apples comparison from a technical perspective in switching from a Telgorithm to even as a CSP directly to a DCA, because you have to deal with some of the items that we mentioned here. So even a CSP that may qualify to go to a DCA for various reasons, from a technical perspective, it's still not going to be apples to apples from a technical, as there's other pieces that may be needed to go directly to Syniverse.
Yeah, that's correct, Aaron. So when you think about a CSP or a CNP, you all have, relationships with TCR, and there's contractual relationships that you must be able to maintain. When you connect to Syniverse, the expectation is you can do all that stuff. So certain carriers have throughput limitations, and we expect the CNP or the CSP to be able to monitor that and own that. So if you are sending past that throughput level, Syniverse is going to drop that message. So the expectation, and something we know Telgorithm does really well, is you'll actually manage that on your customer's behalf. So again, if you are a CSP looking to go directly to a DCA, there are certain legal requirements that you have with TCR, and then there's just certain technical requirements that you're going to need to develop to work in this 10DLC ecosystem. And that's where you would want to look at a CNP. It might be more effective to partner with a Telgorithm or somebody else instead of trying to develop it yourself and come directly to Syniverse.
Right. And just to highlight that and then mention one other point there is that, to your point, we're not going to be discussing much of that today, but when you become approved for a brand or campaign on 10DLC, there are certain throughputs that the different network operators allot. We won't get into the specifics of that, but you would need somebody to be managing that for you, or it can potentially cause a disruption. And by default, it's not typically the job of the DCA. They're doing many other things we're going to discuss today to manage that. And therefore, when thinking about whether you should be partnering with a connectivity partner like Telgorithm versus going to a DCA, that should also be going into your checklist of things that need to be thought about prior to doing so. One last comment I'll just make on it as well is the way I kind of like to put it is, if you wanted to buy a can of Coke, would you call up Coca-Cola corporate or just go to the grocery store, right? And the point being is it also depends on the type of traffic, the amount of traffic you are. Are you a messaging API provider that it makes sense for you to go to a DCA? Or you're a little bit further downstream where it makes more sense to partner with a connectivity partner like a Telgorithm that takes care of all that complexity for you, allowing you to get done what you need to do.
Correct. Yeah. And get the messages going a lot faster. As you know, to use your analogy, I can go to the corner store right now and have a Coke in my hand, and in 5 minutes, or we're in Texas, Dr. Pepper. I have to say Dr. Pepper. But if, or I could call up Dr. Pepper and it might take, months. So.
Right. Awesome. We could slide forward here to the over here to, and again, speaking of which, a lot of what our questions are, and our questions are more focused on what we hear from the industry, from our customers and the industry in general, is there's, compliance is an entryway ticket to get into A2P 10 DLC, is the way I like to put it. A lot of people get confused and they think they're purchasing compliance. Compliance always existed, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you could speak to that. And a lot of what I would even say, when I try to say all the time, is not even that there's many new regulations on compliance, it's that they're just actually now being enforced. So while they may have been in place on person to person, they were still there. It's just that they were not being enforced in that way. And now that we're rolling out A2P 10 DLC to create a cleaner path for traffic with higher throughputs that's dedicated for business to consumer communication, which person to person does not allow, we want to make sure we can maintain that clean path. The carriers do, the aggregators do, and therefore, in order to do that, the entryway ticket, it's not the goal, but the entryway ticket is to make sure that everyone entering this ecosystem is compliant. And therefore, compliance has now become a thing, making sure that I'm clear on what those compliance things are so that I can get approved to get into this clean path to be able to communicate via higher throughputs to my businesses. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, I would say compliance is key for all types of A2P traffic. And my goal at Syniverse and my team's goal is to make 10 DLC the gold standard for A2P messaging.
Awesome. And so just to get into some of the specifics, and I know there's so many questions because there's so many areas that compliance touches on, and we probably won't be able to address all of them today. But just to talk on a few of the recent ones here, we have bulleted up over here. If you could talk to some of these. Again, this is by no means going to be encompassing, and we'll get into where we can bring information in it. But just to touch on some of these points that are come up pretty often these days, and kind of give us kind of a highlight, if you will, a high level of why these have become important, how you from a DCA perspective looks at this in regards to approving, campaigns forward. I just want to also add, because you might have missed it earlier on. So Trevor leads the team at what's arguably the largest DCA in North America, and literally the team that approves your campaigns. So just to make it clear for our audience listening here, the campaign registry does not approve campaigns. You put your campaigns in there, which what I like to call is kind of maybe a pre-approval, but ultimately, regardless of who you're using, as far as a provider, that is going to have, that campaign will need to make its way upstream to somebody who's on a team that that Trevor is on at a DCA that will look at this campaign, make sure it's compliant before fully approving it, and then the associated numbers that get attached to such campaign then become registered. It's kind of that final path. So I just want to make sure to the audience that it's clear of who we're talking to here and why that matters, because there is a big confusion in the industry. Many folks think, hey, I'm going to reach out to TCR, or AKA the campaign registry, on why this campaign didn't get approved, and they're just going to direct you likely to your CNP or further upstream, because that's actually where these approvals take place. Is that correct as well?
That is super accurate. I like to say that TCR is the start of compliance, where you register your brand, you register your use case, and then it falls on the DCA. Well, it falls on the CNP and the CSP as well, but it ultimately
Totally.
falls on the DCA to make sure that these campaigns that are being registered are compliant with the carrier code of conduct.
Awesome. And so just to get into a few specific ones here, again, these are ones that have come up or come up a lot as of late. We'll address them one at a time. So for a campaign to be approved, it must be associated with a brand with a fully functioning compliant website, even if the website is not necessarily called out in what's called the call to action section within the campaign registry, where you're supposed to list the areas where you gather opt-in, which is super important for this given campaign. Opt-in is absolutely required, and you have to let both your connectivity partner and DCA know how this information is being gathered. So the point here being, even if you collect opt-in in another place, but your website has an area you're doing that as well, that needs to be compliant, even if you're not calling that in the call to action section. That being said, can you walk us through some of the things to be aware of in this regard?
Yeah, so I think the best way to summarize this this slide right here is what we call KYC. Know your customer. If your registration is clear and there's a good functioning website, especially if your call to action says we're using a website to collect phone numbers, well, please make sure you have a functioning website that actually shows where the numbers are being collected. Your privacy policy, shows that you're not selling the phone numbers to third parties, and that you're maintaining opt-ins and respecting opt-outs. I cannot impress upon the audience enough is that opt-ins are key. It's mandated by the carriers. It's mandated by the DCAs. It's mandated across the industry. But opt-out is even more important. Honor opt-outs. If you have a campaign with 40 numbers and a customer says, stop, I don't want this to one of those 40 numbers, honor that opt-out across all 40 numbers. So I think if you know your customer, then filling out the brand and campaign registration should be very easy and simple. And then it makes our job as a DCA that much easier to go ahead and vet it and approve the campaign for its use case. So then that brand can get their messages down to the consumer.
Awesome. Really, really good points here. And really quickly, just as far as the privacy policy goes, part of it. So just, and I know we call it out over here, but sole proprietor, much smaller business. I'm just getting started. So less of a requirement on the privacy policy piece when it comes to sole proprietor, if I have that correct. That said, when it comes to any other type of business, and we say established business, meaning that with the government entity, you are established as more than a sole proprietor, you are then required to have a privacy policy on your website if that is a place where you are getting opt-in from. Again, regardless of whether you're calling that out as the specific place that you're actually gathering opt-in from. Is that correct?
That is correct. And then the one thing that I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of is that in the campaign registry, when you submit a campaign, you can also submit attachments. So
Yes.
let's say you don't have a website, but you are a brand, you can attach in there what your privacy policy is that's sent via link when you do the initial confirmation with the customer.
Awesome. Yes, it's a very good point, because many times it either is not accessible, because again, correct me if I'm wrong, but your team, when a campaign and brand are submitted upstream, all brands must have a website, and that website must match the brand's name and so on and so forth. You guys are clicking through the site to validate and verify that if there is opt-ins being collected, that there is proper opt-in on the site. And if for whatever reason, maybe it's feature gated or it's not, you have to go through 30 different things to get there, you might actually have it. Your team has only so much time to spend on trying to find where that is. So the advantage of the TCR is that in that multimedia area where you can add multimedia attachments, you can also take a screenshot of where that privacy policy is, along with maybe a link on it if it is feature gated, and put that there, which lets your team know, hey, it might be a little bit difficult to access this here. So you could just now upload this here, and it'll make that much easier for your team to get this going forward. Is that a correct assessment?
That is 100% correct, Aaron. We see it a lot, especially for those campaigns that are for internal employee communication. So obviously the website, as you mentioned, is going to be feature gated. So our recommendation is always, okay, since we're not going to set up a VPN to go view your privacy policy, because the amount of time that would take, put in the attachment, or, figure out a way to get it to us so that way we can review it.
Right. And speaking of which, one other side thing, and it's kind of indirectly related, but I know that it's also an important question. And I'm just going to deviate from this for a split second, and then we'll get into some specifics of the privacy policy. But timing, you mentioned timing, right? So as you probably are well aware, last year with all the changes, there was kind of a backup on approvals on the DCA side, because as we just discussed, there's not a lot of DCAs, and most providers are connectivity partners in the industry that are using a DCA, hence led to a bottleneck. But again, it became bottleneck because of a lot of the cutoffs that were announced by various providers last year. How would you say things are right now in general, regards to processing time over at Syniverse in general these days? I know there's no guarantees and things can bottle up again, but as of late, where could you tell the audience on what can be expected? If you have a fully compliant campaign and it is shared, what is the kind of the reasonable expected turnaround time they can expect for when this campaign will be reviewed?
Yeah, so we try to tell all of our customers 5 business days. Once we get it in, we try to get it out within 5 business days. Obviously, to your point, there's
Mhm.
times where there's not complete information in there and we have to go back and forth. We do have opportunities for our customers if they require expedited vetting, that we do offer those services. And, we also offer a path for escalations if needed as well. Say, once in a blue moon, a customer says, "Hey, I need this one campaign." We do have ways to help out with that for all of our partners, all of our customers. And we do also have our team is we have a mighty strong team of people that are dedicated, to just vetting campaigns that come in. But we have also trained additional people in our company, so that way, if there is a huge influx of campaigns, we can scale up quickly to meet those needs to try to maintain
Awesome.
our 5 business day turnaround.
Awesome. That's great to hear, and great news compared to some of the bottlenecks that were experienced only with you guys, but industry-wide last year. So it's great to hear things are up to speed, and 5 business days does sound quite more reasonable considering everything that has to be reviewed these days, with an optionality potentially for an urgent or an expedited situation, much more than when things have been. And I think the audience, we've already seen that on our end, and I think the audience can take confidence in that in general, that could be the expectation for the most part going forward. One other thing to also mention here, just on this slide before moving on, is on sole proprietor. So sole proprietor, as I just touched on a few minutes ago, sole proprietor is not a path. There was one provider out there that dubbed something earlier on called starter brands. And the whole point of it was to avoid, see, when you register a brand in TCR, part of the requirement is that you get the tax ID, the EIN, and they match the EIN with the legal name. I'm sure you're aware of this. And that's actually done on the TCR side. So what had been done, and it's unfortunate, some providers in the industry, for various reasons, and some people argue it's not always easy to get an EIN from a brand, and we get that. But at the end of the day, that was a requirement that the carriers had required to become registered. So they kind of stumbled upon this thing called sole proprietor. Oh, I don't necessarily need this here. Much lower throughputs, that's fine. I'll deal with the lower throughputs. And so there were many providers that created this thing called a starter brand. You don't need your EIN if you send below this amount of messages, which was completely misused, hence led to starter brands, aka sole proprietor 1.0, actually being sunset last year because it was taken advantage of, and it actually caused disruptions across many providers that misguided customers, unfortunately, on this. And that led to the path of something called sole proprietor 2.0, which is what we're looking at here. And sole proprietor 2.0 is not as easy to get into, meaning, yes, you're a sole proprietor and you have the ID to show that, but it also now requires a certain level of reporting. Can you talk on that a little bit?
Yeah, so that is, we kind of stay outside of that. It's generally between the CNP or CSP and the campaign registry. You all have to make your commitments before, my understanding is before TCR will allow you to use the sole proprietor use case again. So if we see that, then our understanding is that the due diligence has been done between the CNP, CSP, and TCR, but we will actually still verify that you all can meet those requirements before we'll start vetting those sole proprietor campaigns.
Right. And because now there's a little bit more to the process, I think there's even a one-time an over-the-top provisioning that's required to validate some setup on that as well. And then there is a reporting that is required. There are many vendors, because this is now required, that simply don't support it now at this point in time. I just want to make it clear. Telgorithm fully supports that, and Syniverse, supporting us behind that, fully supports that as well. But the reason I'm mentioning it here is because there is a large segment of the industry that has true sole proprietors that need a provider to properly support that. It can be done. It needs to go through a process to be able to do that. You need to find a provider that is partnering up with a DCA to be able to, and TCR, to be able to properly support that. It's not available by default.
Right. Yeah, true statement.
Awesome. We could slide ahead a little bit over here just to get a little bit into some of the compliance layers. So we've put up over here just to give some examples here. If you could talk to anything you're seeing here, I'm sure you see this all the time, and your team of what we're looking at over here, Trevor.
Yeah, so these are definitely the easiest campaigns to vet. If we get a website that gets any of these errors, it's like, well, that was easy. That's a decline.
Mhm.
Again, it's a requirement in the industry is, especially if you are using your website to collect opt-ins, it's got to be functioning. So if we go to view a website and it's not functioning, that's easy. That's a no. Like, I'm sorry, this is not a functioning website. But what we're starting to see, one of the latest trends is that it's really cheap and easy now to secure a domain and to create a website using many wonderful templates out there. And I am all for the ability for especially smaller brands, mom and pop shops, to be able to have a functioning website cheaply, and so that way they can be compliant with what the industry demands. But on the same flip side, we're seeing bad actors take advantage of the easiness and cheapness of setting up these websites. So some of the additional things that we're starting to look at now that are not on here, but that I'd love to speak to is, one, as we click through a website, we want to make sure it makes sense. If we see multiple campaigns from different brands, all with the same format of a website, that starts ringing the alarm of, okay, let's dive into this further. We click on subsections of pages and you'll see something where it says, hey, register here. And then underneath it is the Latin placeholder still. So like, why would a functioning website still have multiple Latin placeholders in place? So those are the things that we start looking at further and like, okay, that's weird. And then really the most interesting thing, because these templates are so easy to use and they use stock images, when you go look at like the About Us section and you see the CEO and like, I know I've seen that picture somewhere. So you do a Google image search and all of a sudden you're seeing that CEO was also a patient for a commercial, was this, was that. And you're like, okay. And then you go to LinkedIn and that person doesn't even exist. Like, those are the things that we're looking at while we're vetting campaigns. So, I hate to give a little bit of peek behind the curtain, but those are the things that we want to find, and those are the things that really highlight to us like, oh, okay, this is not a compliant campaign. Like, we're gonna approve. If we approve this, they may try to send good messages for a little bit and then it's going to go bad. So that's where we really try to catch it at the front, and doing the website lookups, looking at the privacy policies, looking at, if you want to go to the next slide, actually,
That's it.
looking at how you are collecting opt-in information. We use all that together to verify the compliance that this campaign is going to be good and good long-term.
Awesome. And just to, again, double click further on this, because this is, a little bit of a tricky subject. We'll say sometimes it does come up quite a bit. So what I would say is there's a legitimate reason for templating, and then there's an illegitimate reason for templating. So the illegitimate reason you just alluded to right now, I'm going to template because, I don't want to make all these changes, or I'm planning on not doing everything, properly. That's one, and what DCA is looking out for. On the other hand, sometimes there are legitimate use cases for templating. Like, I'll give an example without mentioning which customer of ours it is. One of our customers is a software platform that offers, if they're a vertical CRM, that offers text messaging for salons and spas. And obviously, each of these salons and spas is its own brand and it has its own website. But each of these websites, they don't necessarily know all the compliance layers. And even if our customer, the CSP, told the brand, hey, make these changes, it could be a big headache to make that change. How does it go through? It's got to go all through this legal stuff on their end. And so sometimes what's being offered to make things easier here is, hey, this is a legitimate brand. They're doing things right. It's just too difficult for them to manage changes to their website. So they would rather rely on our customer, the CSP, to give them, kind of like Wix, give them a template. You plug in your logo, you plug in this, and everything, or your basic information. Nothing that you said should be left blank, but
Yeah.
everything has to be updated here with the right CEO's picture and right information, because it could be further downstream. There could be a difficulty on that. And the point here being is they would have to essentially sunset that other website, and this needs to be their exclusive site, and the domain needs to match the brand on there as well. So that would be a legitimate use case here, I would imagine. I'm asking you for being able to template to make things easier for the blue collar business that's trying to do things right, but it's just more complicated versus the other side we mentioned where we're trying to sneak some things in and not get things across. And I'm just curious, I'm sure you're aware of the legit use case I mentioned. How does your team look at that, or look at refining that, or to knowing the difference between the two?
No, and you're right, Aaron. The templatizing websites is not a problem. As I said at the very beginning, I
Right.
love that we make it easier for people to be compliant and to spin up a website quickly. So that way, not only do you have SMS, but you also have search engine optimization features you can take advantage of by having a website. So I
Mhm.
love that. I think that's great. And again, totally understand the point where a software provider has kind of one template look that they like to use for all their customers. Again, not a problem. Our team is well trained to go in and look and see, okay, hey, everything's filled out correctly. The privacy policy is there, as you're seeing on here. SMS disclosures is there. It's more of those nuances that we get into where if we see one campaign that has a website and everything, all the information in there is the same, and then another campaign has the same exact website. Those are the ones where it's like, okay, this doesn't make any sense, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a decline. It just means, hey, let's go look a little bit further into this. We can even check and see, when the URL was registered.
Mhm.
There's a lot of tricks and tools that we have at our disposal. So if our curiosity is piqued because something looks off, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a decline. It just means, hey, let's go look a little further.
Right. And I'll even add one further point that's also really important. And again, I'm going to literally put a little bit on Telgorithm right now. So that's why it's so important to, whether it's Telgorithm or not, but when choosing a connectivity partner, to make sure that partner has a good relationship with whatever DCA they are using. Because if you're just flipping stuff organically, your team is literally getting thousands and thousands of these campaigns, and they may not know in general the difference between, oh, this kind of looks like it could be spammy because they're templating, versus this is legitimate. Now all of a sudden you have a ton of rejections coming through, and it causes frustration, versus working with a provider that has a good relationship with DCA that says, hey, before we send this across, we educate our customer on what they're going to need to be aware of, tell their customer to be aware of when it comes to templating proactively, and then also letting upstream Syniverse know, hey, we're working with this CSP who's working with these set of brands coming down the pipe, making sure this is okay in advance at a high level. Your team saying, okay, we're expecting this coming across here, will make it a lot easier for your team to then get these moving forward, because there's kind of a know your customer situation here between CSP and the brand, making that easier versus just spilling it across the board there and then getting a bunch of rejections when there's costs for that, and then resubmissions and things of this nature. So again, just to say, Telgorithm takes a lot of time in trying to understand this and work with DCA Syniverse to make sure that we are proactively talking to our customers and Syniverse on the back end to make sure this is all proactively set up so we don't typically run into issues. And that actually helps everyone in the ecosystem. I know as a brand and CSP what to expect. Telgorithm knows what we're going to require, what we need to expect, and Syniverse on the back end knows what they're to expect. So therefore, there's no mistakes here.
Yeah, and that's for Telgorithm for all of our customers. We'll hold weekly sync ups. We will actually go through campaigns that we're seeing that are being rejected. If there's any trends, we provide tips and tricks. And then if I could plug the other side of my job that I do on a daily
Totally.
basis, our professional services, where you can actually partner with us at a much deeper level on campaign vetting, post campaign vetting, and even customer brand education. We'll even get to the point where we'll join a call with you and your brand to kind of explain what we're seeing and things that could be adjusted for better success.
Right, exactly. And I'll actually add
Reach out to your account manager for more.
anything on this one here.
No, I think, Aaron, what you guys have highlighted here is important. That's one of the key features or the key metric for carrier codes of conduct is opt-ins will not be shared across the ecosystem. So that is something that we pay attention to heavily in privacy policies.
And just to highlight here, just when we're talking specifics here, so when it comes to my privacy policy, you could have opt-in in your privacy policy, but it should be directly on the form itself that actually takes the opt-in. So point number one, is that correct?
Can you repeat that? I don't follow
Sure.
the question.
So if you have a form on your website that collects the phone number,
Yes.
many folks like to put a link on the bottom, rather than put opt-in language on the form, they'll put a link on the bottom to the privacy policy, which has the opt-in within the privacy policy. Is that something that's okay, or should you be doing this, literally putting the opt-in directly on the form?
I like both, preferably. I like it on the form like this because it's very easy to find. And then I also do like the ability to go click on a privacy policy to view it further. There's no hard and fast rule either way, as long as we can validate and confirm it's there. But again, as you're thinking about the amount of work that we do to vet these campaigns, the easier it is for us to find it, the better.
Awesome. And then one other last thing, as far as verbiage goes, within the privacy policy, it must either specifically state, and correct me if I have this right, we do not share your information with third parties, period. That would work. Or we may share your information with third parties, but we'll never do so for marketing or promotional reasons is the other way to do it. Do I have those correct?
So I am not a legal expert. The first one, yes. The second one is your phone number should never be shared unless for legal reasons. And we generally see that in political. Anything else, I would say it's just error on the side of caution, that the phone number is not shared.
Got it. For any reason or purpose, even beyond marketing or promotional reasons.
Like I said, we would probably want to get, we do in vetting, we do get guidance, but we do get guidance, but in general, it's the codes of conduct all state that phone numbers should not be shared. So unless for legal reasons.
Cool. Let's move forward here to drift content. So first, tee us up here and let us know what that is, because this is actually a very common question. And then I have potentially, depending on where we go, a few questions about it myself, but kind of lay out for our audience in layman's way what drift content actually is.
So when you register a campaign, you provide sample messages that, hey, this is kind of what our messages are going to look like. So if you register a campaign for 2FA, your sample message will say, we're going to send OTP and then a 6-digit number. Perfect. Drift content is when the messages we're actually getting don't look like the sample message. So it may say instead of saying OTP, it will say one-time password spelled out and then a 7-digit number. That's technically drift, but it's not drift. It's in line with the spirit of what was registered. Where I would say it's actually where drift would be observed is instead of it sending 2FA at all, now it's sending, hey, call us back to get 20% off your next order. That's drift.
Right.
Or if you've registered a URL for the campaign, it's in the sample messages and it says, www.url syniverse.com. But then the actual messages go through are to a different URL that's not at all affiliated with the campaign that was registered or the brand. Those are drift where we start seeing concerns of like, okay, why is this drifted? And, depending on the severity, we will actually go and suspend the campaign right then and there, and then, reach out to our customer and advise them that we are seeing drift.
Totally. And so, Jen, just to highlight here, it would be unreasonable, and it is not the case, that you're expecting to match the exact sample message you put in TCR word for word with every colon and every period. That's not an expectation, and that would be
Correct.
unreasonable. On the other hand, the other extreme is you can't take it to the other extreme, set it on one, and then send completely different content. Then you actually said, and even worse, something from a different brand. Many times people like to bunch up. We didn't even touch on this, but it could be it's a question further down. I don't want to spend as much money creating all these brands and campaigns. So I'm just going to create one brand, and all these brands are going to be under this one campaign, and we're going to shoot everything out of that, which is not the proper way to set things up and can lead to, like you just said, message deliverability problems and campaign suspensions on the one side of things. But where this also comes up, and kind of the reverse of this, kind of we'll call it the legit way of asking this, is, many people have conversational messaging use cases, and a conversational message can look like sometimes, because the conversation can go many places. An example I'll give is, let's just say, I'm just going to give an example, Verizon Wireless, right? I might call into customer service. I have three different questions. I have a question about a technical issue on my cell phone. I have an issue about my bill, my last month bill, and I want to talk about my new plan. Now, this is customer service. It's conversational. It's three different things going on here. So the question is, in those samples of a conversational, what should be put in those samples, but also how far in a conversational campaign can it veer off the sample that's being put in the message? I think is one of the things that I've seen in this area that come up a lot.
Yeah, so when we get that type of campaign conversational, we see them all the time, especially for use cases, customer care. So
Yep.
be cognizant of the use case that you're submitting. There are some, like if you submit 2FA as your use case and we start seeing conversational, that's going to be a problem. But for what you're recommending, it's mainly we see it in customer care. That's probably the main use case where we see conversational. And what we expect in the call to action and the actual message registration is, the explanation of, hey, this is conversational, two-way because it's customer care back and forth. And then we'll see some of the sample messages will kind of highlight that it's conversational in nature. Those we wouldn't consider drift. But what I would caution people on, though, is that even though it is conversational, there are still carrier code of conduct and DCA code of conduct that, we would still hold those conversations too. So you'd want to stay away from shaft. You'd want to stay away from cannabis, those types of things in your message. So though not drift, still not compliant traffic.
Totally. Cool. Let's move on to the next one, because I think we're running a bit on time. Wish we can keep you forever.
I'm surprised how quick this has gone. This has been great.
We can go on all day here. Where should software providers go for compliance guidance? So this is a common question that comes up. Again, not to get into all the specific details, but as you know, famously, and you don't have to mention yes or no, this is just a fact I'm stating, is most of the network operators themselves do not post on their own websites anything about A2P 10DLC. So fortunately, the TCR has begun to put out stuff. And typically the way it works is the various network operators are partnering with DCA. They then work, you being one of them, work with you guys on what is going to be required, and then it gets passed further downstream. Many times things are either lost in translation when that happens, or things are changing on that, or sometimes people see a variance between one provider to another provider, and it just causes a lot of confusion. And now that compliance matters, to simply just become registered, which is required to send any tax, is why it matters here. And so the question here is, in general, who should these software providers, aka the CSPs or brands, rely on most when it comes to compliance to make sure they're assured they're going to get things right?
So first and foremost, any software provider should be relying on their CSP or CNP. That is the front line for compliance. Like a Telgorithm, for example, should be well aware of the carrier code of conduct, the guidelines, so that way you can help your brands. Syniverse as a DCA. So one of the things that we do is anytime there's either new compliance requirements that we are putting out there. So back in December, we sent a notice that said, going forward, if you're sending shipping notifications, don't include a URL, because we see that as a high smishing and phishing attack. That was a Syniverse compliance suggestion that we sent out, and those go to all of our customers, and then you can pass those downstream. We actually house them on our website as well. And then the other thing is CTIA. So if you Google carrier code of conducts, CTIA is usually one of the first ones that pull up. All of the carriers follow CTIA. A couple of them have their own little offshoots, but to get a good understanding of compliance, CTIA to me is the foundation, and then each carrier is kind of built off into it. But on the CTIA website, you can actually find the individual carriers' codes of conduct, and then Syniverse actually houses them as well. And we always send the links out sometimes as part of our communication as well. So those would be the easiest way to find stuff for any software provider. And then again, ask your CMP, your CSP, and then if your CMP and CSP does not know, they're always more than welcome to come to Syniverse, and we're happy to help that as well.
Would you answer a question from a non-Syniverse customer that just wanted a question and to find out about compliance? Can they just send an email to some email in Syniverse and say, hey, I just had a quick compliance question. Would you guys answer that? Or do you need to be an actual Syniverse customer?
Yeah, so we prefer to be Syniverse customers because, again, the way we vet campaigns, we're doing it to the codes of conduct and then what Syniverse deems. So I would hate to answer a question that maybe is just Syniverse specific, such as, I mentioned our shipping notification. Maybe others are still allowing that. So I would prefer to require that them be a customer of Syniverse, or at least, a customer of one of our CMP CSPs. And then instead of, like, say, for example, a Telgorithm brand reach out directly to me, I would actually come to Telgorithm first and say, hey, here's the question I got. How would you like to handle this? So I would actually put it back on you all to go answer the question for your customer. I would not speak on your behalf to any customer. And
which is actually the right path
across the board. Yeah.
Right. Sometimes people think I'm just going to go straight to the source. And the problem with that is, like you mentioned, is you might not have all the right context, being that they're not your customer. So you may answer a question general, but it is the right thing to say, hey, speak with your connectivity partner on that. I just wanted to highlight that here. Again, I know we're running up on time, so just sliding over here. Is there anything today that you could tell us about what's next in regards to from where you sit in the industry on A2P 10? You'll see maybe the answer is nothing. Everything's here. Or what could we expect over the next, we'll say 6 months to a year, that any changes, anything of note you'd be willing to share at this time about what we can expect over the next 6 months to a year?
Yeah, so I would say first, our anti-spam has continued to get smarter, and will continue to be leveraged to find bad actors or bad traffic. As I alluded to at the very beginning, you may see a campaign get registered, everything looks great, traffic looks great, and then all of a sudden it deviates. We continue to expect our anti-spam platform to continue to evolve to meet what the bad actors are trying to do and to stop it, so it does not get sent to the carriers. And then the second thing is protecting customer credentials. As we both talked about, templatizing websites has made it very easy for people to spin up websites and messaging traffic that's legitimate. But the part of the problem is that the security awareness of these smaller shops is just not there. And they may, have accidentally either exposed their credentials and now their campaign is hacked and sending fraudulent messages, or they've posted them somewhere accidentally because they just weren't aware. So one of the biggest things I see in 2024, and it's something Syniverse wants to work with all of our customers, is how do we help protect your brand's credentials? So that way, we don't see that as something that we see that as something that we can really help protect with.
Awesome. Cool. Samantha, I guess we can take some Q&A if we still have some time for it.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes, so we'll try to get through at least a couple. So Trevor, I'm going to ask you these questions we received from our forum, from people who are attending today. So we talked a little bit about the backlog earlier in this presentation, and this question pertains to like the order of operations for that. So the question is, what is the process for reviewing backlogs of 10DLC campaigns? They're asking, is there a standard for the order in which these are reviewed, or are people on your team just given batches and they review them as they please?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in general, it's first in, first out. Obviously, as we work with our customers, say, for example, in this use case, Telgorithm says, "Hey, we have one brand that's going to submit, 20 campaigns. Here's a pre-checklist of everything." And then that all 20, we might send to one person and say, "Hey, here's the background. Here's what we're looking at." Instead of having, 10 different people look at one campaign, sometimes it makes sense, but we do that on a case by case basis. But generally, it's first in, first out. And as I've mentioned, two things: one, we can scale up as necessary if we get a huge influx, and then two, we do have professional services for those campaigns that require an expedited vetting, and then those would obviously go to the front of the line. But because of how we're set up and the scale of the team, that doesn't mean the other campaigns are actually impacted.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Awesome.
This next question, what happens to my approved brand and their associated campaigns if I migrate to another API provider, aka a CNP?
Yeah, that is I get to punt on that question. That is a question between your CNP and your new CNP and TCR.
Okay.
Got it.
We talked about sole proprietorship earlier as well. So this question is, why are there different requirements for sole proprietors? I think you guys spoke to it, but if you could summarize at a very high level why it would be different, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think Aaron alluded to it earlier, and I think in summary, it's just some people were utilizing it as a way to get around the registration requirements that are mandated to help us understand who's sending traffic.
Right.
Okay, I think we have time for at least one more. So quickly, what happens if I lump multiple brands under a single campaign or under multiple campaigns to save money? Well, that doesn't have to be the reason, but in this case, to save money.
We touched on it earlier too, but go ahead, Trevor.
Aaron, you please. I mean, you said it so eloquently the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the idea is that, look, when, TCR first started, and I guess this is more, maybe even a TCR question, is there was something called a dedicated campaign and a mixed volume or mixed use case campaign. Now there is even a low volume mixed use case campaign. So ideally, the translation of a campaign in TCR at 10DLC land is one use case. It should be one campaign. Now they did recognize, obviously, there's a cost, and there's different things that are involved in that. And so they created this concept called a mixed campaign. You can have up to 5 use cases in one campaign. And one of the other things to consider is volume, right? Low volume or high volume. Remember, the more numbers you associate or the more traffic or use cases you associate with a given campaign are all eating up the same volume. And as we discussed earlier, A2P 10DLC is about communicating business to consumer with the higher volumes, the higher throughputs that you're getting. And so one of the issues is throughput allocation there. On the one hand, the other hand is like Trevor was alluding to earlier, DCAs upstream that are partnered with the network operators want to keep a clean ecosystem. And in order for them to do that properly, things need to be meted out properly to be able to understand what's going on here, to be able to monitor that individually to keep things clean across the board. And therefore bungling up everything together just to save on cost does, number one, you're stifling your throughputs. I'll even add, if somebody messes up somewhere, even by mistake, let's just assume something gets caught up in a filter by mistake and it's completely legitimate, but somehow something got caught up. Everyone that is associated with that campaign, every single number, all the traffics will have an immediate disruption if that campaign gets suspended. So would you want to ultimately put everything on there? And it's not even to say someone's going to do something nefarious on purpose. Something could happen by mistake that causes a complete disruption, and you want to mete it out. So those are really the 3 things that I think about when somebody tries to ultimately think they're saving some money, which again, you could use a low volume campaign if needed and a mixed type of campaign as well, versus just buttoning up everything together. And in my opinion, and from what we've seen, you're just asking for trouble in doing that.
I agree. I agree. Sometimes nothing else to be said.
Yeah. Awesome, you guys. That was an amazing 60 minutes. Thank you both so much for bringing your expertise. Trevor, it was so great to have you.
No,
Yes.
thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you for
much.
having me. This is all my pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to just share kind of, what it's like to be a DCA in the ecosystem.
I think it's very
Totally.
enlightening for our guests, so thank you. And thank you, Aaron, as always. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us on our website, telgorithm.com, or you can email us, team@telgorithm.com. And until next time, thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye-bye.